So this, Randy, is a picture of schooling yellowfin tuna. You can see that they school quite close together. The impact of this when you're catching fish is sometimes you'll have 3 or 4 fish caught all at the same time. And considering these are very large fish, that creates an awful lot of fun when you've got 4 or 5 tuna on the line at the same time. And given their size and their value, everybody wants to make sure you bring them in. It takes a lot of cooperation among the fishermen to try to keep their lines from crossing. There's some strategies that some fishermen use using smaller line, which cuts the bigger line, or to use wire line, which will cut the bigger line, giving you a better chance to keep your fish on. But normally it's a question of cooperation.
So how do you keep everybody from tangling up if 2 guys on either side of the boat have a fish? I mean, is there a process for that?
Basically, you watch each other, you watch the lines as the tuna are swimming through the water as you're bringing them in, and you go under and over each other as the lines cross and crisscross.
Yeah.
And even more serious problems happens when you go to the bow of the boat and you've got the anchor line there. Yeah. And there, I got some pictures of it where you see the mates reaching over the side of the boat to pass this $1,000 rod from one mate to the other.
The guy was doing that.
Yeah.
It's like he goes over the front of the boat and it's like, what for?
What for, right? Because he's got a, in this case, the person had a 200-pound swordfish on it,
yeah.
And the swordfish had crossed underneath the anchor line.
Okay, that's what he was. I'm wondering, why is this guy crawling out there?
Right. In this particular case, that fish went around the boat 4 times.
Oh, golly. What time of night was that?
That was about 11 or 12 o'clock at night. Mahi-Mahi jumping out of the water for a lure, in this case a pink lure that's being trolled behind the boat. There were several occasions when entire schools would be jumping out of the water, just running horizontal to the lures that are being trolled, and we would get multiple strikes at once from these fish jumping out of the water to get the bait. It's quite dramatic.
So I think you mentioned something yesterday about when you're trolling and somebody gets a fish on, everybody else reels in?
When you're trolling, everybody brings their reels in because you're no longer trolling anymore because the captain stops the boat. So the guy who's got the boat on, the guy who's got the fish on will bring the fish in. The other anglers will reel their lines in as rapidly as possible, but then they'll shift to their jigging rods because the chances are there's a school of Mahi-Mahi or a school of tuna nearby, and they'll try to jig them instead of going after them with the trolled lures.
Big 100-foot boat. Somebody says fish on while you're daytime trolling. Everybody else reels in and the captain throttles down.
Right.
Wow.
Tuna also will jump. I've seen tuna jump out of the water maybe once in 20 years of tuna fishing. It happened in the early morning light. This particular slide, you see a tuna jumping here up for a lure that's being trolled in the water.
You snagged that in the air?
He got that in the air, yes.
About a 100-pound fish, looks like.
We talked a little bit about how the fish come along the continental shelf. What the continental shelf does and what the canyons do is they affect the Gulf Stream. They make it go from just sort of a smooth flowing stream heading off towards Europe into creating massive eddies of warm water. You can see here that the warmest water here is about 86 degrees. We talked about the tuna preferring water in the 70, 74 kind of range. So you see how that warm water at this time of the year has come quite close in the shore. I show here 160 miles off to, it's pretty much the edge of the canyon along here. But you'll also get entire eddies that are swirling in on the continental shelf. Those will also be locations where there can often be large schools of tuna and baitfish located. This is a similar picture which shows the temperature range. Again here with the sort of ideal range here in the 25-degree range, and you can see underneath the names of the canyons. So we see here Babylon Canyon, which is next to the Hudson Canyon, coming up towards Nantucket Canyon, which is beyond where we were fishing. So you can see here again how the water temperatures can be quite varied. There are some spots here where you get really warm spots, and again those really warm spots are where the tuna and the baitfish will be located. So the captain is constantly looking for the temperature changes in the water as he's trolling during the day and prepares to set up at night. This slide is one that shows how the temperature in the water concentrates the bait fish. Although it refers to the Sargasso Sea. The Sargasso Sea is actually the spawning ground in the winter for many of the tuna. You also see Sargasso weed, which is a very common form of seaweed that grows in the Sargasso Sea that floats all the way up to the area where we're fishing off New York. But you can see here how the sun creates these places where there are upwellings of currents and circular movements of currents that concentrate the diatoms. And according to this scientific study, these concentrations of diatoms can be 10,000 to 100,000 times the norm.
Wow. Based on the Gulf Stream.
Based on the Gulf Stream, and then based on the sun, and then based on the way the current's bouncing off the underwater structure.
Put all three together, and you've got a bunch of food in one place.
Yeah, right.
Neat.
This slide, Randy, again shows, but in even more graphic detail, the nature of these temperature eddies that swirl in towards the Atlantic coast. So here's New York City here, here's Montauk at the end. And you can see this enormous temperature eddy here, and you can see another temperature eddy here, way offshore. This is too far offshore to fish. But you can see there's some extremely warm water here, quite close to shore. This would be about 170, 180 miles offshore here. And this would again be a location where we'd have a high probability of catching tuna.
So even though that's 2,000 feet deep, it's still 80-something degrees.
It's still 80-something degrees.
Wow.
It's very different from the water inshore. So the water inshore is quite cold.
Yeah.
So you can have the water ashore as cold as 60 degrees, and then not too much farther off, it'll have this 84-degree water. You also get a very different effect in terms of the clarity of the water. So along shore, you'll have water that's basically green seawater. You can't see down more than 3 or 4 feet. When you get out offshore, the water is crystal clear as any water in the tropics, and you can see down 20 or 30 feet through the clear water.
Right, understandable.
So one of the main food sources for tuna are squid, and several of the fish that I caught on this trip were caught on live squid. The boat will take out frozen squid. The frozen squid just don't work as well. I fish with a Japanese-made squid jig, which just has tremendous success at catching squid. It has a very interesting set of hooks that are just these sharp needle points that come up. The squid grab it with their tentacles and they can't get off the bait.
Yeah, rig's been working for what, 30 years now?
The Japanese have been using that rig for a number of years.
Well, how long have you been
The one that I had that I
Yeah.
was using was actually a 25-year-old jig.
And you lost it?
No, I didn't lose it.
Okay.
Well, I actually did lose it. I lost one of them, but I have 4 or 5 of them.
Oh.
I have 4 or 5 of them,
Okay,
so
so
I
you
always
got extras.
always make sure I have them because nobody was catching any fish. I managed to catch a live squid, put the live squid in the water, and I caught a large tuna within 5 minutes of putting the live squid in the water, and nobody else caught a tuna for another several hours afterwards.
You know, I noticed you took your Kistler out there with you.
I took rods ranging from a 6-pound test spinning rod, which my daughter uses for
Snoopy
bluegill,
rod, huh?
for bluegill.
Snoopy rod.
And
Took his daughter's Snoopy rod offshore fishing. Help me with that.
I used that, and I also used my very, very lightweight bait casting rod
not
to
a Snoopy rod.
catch squid.
Okay. Light tackle.
Light
to catch
tackle
the
for squid, light tackle to catch the squid,
Then what do you do with it?
and then you put it on your heavy tackle.
20
then
pound,
I took
40 pound, 60 pound what?
my lightest pound test line that I used, and that actually caught most of my fish on, was a 30-pound test line, but I had rods set up a 30-pound test line, 40-pound test line, 50-pound test line, a 60-pound test line. Often I'll have 80-pound test line as well.
Okay.
My basic theory when fishing is if you're not catching anything, you go with the lightest line. If you lose a fish, all right, move up a weight. But if you catch one with the lowest weight and then keep it on, keep using the lightest weight, because of the vision of tuna, it seems to make a real difference. So I was actually high hook on this trip, and I was high hook because I caught 5 out of my 6 tuna on 30-pound test line, and all the other fishermen were using 60-pound to 80-pound test.
That's high hook.
High hook meant I caught 6 tuna. Most of the people only caught 2.
Okay. There's a chart somewhere with a picture of that. I
Yeah,
think?
there's a video that one of the videos shows a chart of the number of fish I caught compared to the other fishermen,
Okay.
and I ascribe that primarily to the light line.
Okay. That's what high hook means. Saltwater stuff.
This is another picture of squid. Squid actually have multiple colors, and they actually change colors as well depending on what they're doing at the time, and also dependent on the species. The squid that we normally eat is calamari, tends to be the lighter color squid. In the past, I've normally caught these darker colored squid, but on this trip it was actually the light colored calamari type squid.
Calamari is the light one. Is there a name for this one?
There are names for it. I don't know the technical names for all the different kinds of
Is one
squid.
better to fish with than the other?
No, it's whatever squid are in the water is what the tuna are eating. The tuna don't really seem to care whether.
They care as long as it looks like a squid.
Right.
It's toast.
Well, you can see the squid also swim in very tight schools normally. And on many trips you'll see these large schools of squid coming up near the boat. We didn't see that on this trip. So the squid were not as plentiful as I had hoped for, but there still were enough to catch some and to use them for bait.
But now that megapod had to be in there chasing squid that was chasing plankton or something. And
The megapod of dolphins that we saw was possibly going after squid or possibly going after some of the other fish, such as the bait fish or the pilchards or the herring or the mackerel that are also all in the same waters.
Okay.
So the main fish that we use for chunking are called butterfish. This is what's used on the East Coast. Butterfish are both used by humans. They're actually a very tasty fish.
This is what you use for chum?
This is what we use for chum and for catching fish on.
Okay.
So I was fishing with whole butterfish, which are 3 to 6 inches in size, depending on the flat the boat has.
Yeah.
And you run your hook in through the mouth and bring it back up to hide it inside the fish through the gill.
Just like crappie minnows.
Just like you do with crappie minnows.
Oh man.
Again, just like walleye have very good eyes,
Yeah.
tuna have extremely good eyes.
Okay. Trout too.
So you really want to hide your bait, and then the mates will cut this up into sections for the chunking itself.
So you don't, when you fish with one of these for tuna in let's say 150 feet of water off a canyon or something, you hook them and then you cut them up?
No. The captain has a set of more rotten butterfish
Okay.
that they use to chunk. They use to chunk, and then really good-looking butterfish are used by the fishermen whole for bait.
Okay.
As you'll notice,
You got to pay for that?
No, this is part of the trip.
Part of the bait.
trip. They pay. They provide all the bait.
Okay.
The fishermen all bring their own rods and reels. Well, the boat does have rods and reels for people that just don't happen to have them.
Yeah.
But most tuna fishermen are serious enough that they have not just one tuna rod, but multiple tuna rods, and
Oh yeah.
it's basically just serious fishermen are going out for
In case
tuna
you
on these
snap
trips.
one or something happens.
In case you snap one, or more probably for different functions and size.
Yeah.
So as I said, I have an 80-pound rod for the really big fish, and then I've got my 30-pound rod in case the fish aren't biting very well on the heavier lines, and I can catch them on the lighter lines.
Okay.
Now, what's important, you'll notice here, is they fish range from Nova Scotia down to Florida, which is the same range we talked about these fish migrating,
Right.
and they overwinter along the 100-fathom contour of the continental shelf.
How deep is that?
100 fathoms is 600 feet deep.
Okay.
So as we're going out to fish, they're in their process of migrating off the continental shelf.
Ah, that's why you guys went there.
That's one of the reasons why we go there, because these fish are coming there,
The food chain's heavy, right where you guys camped out.
right where we camped out.
All right, makes sense.
That's the end of the slogan. I'd like to thank the Viking Fleet for a wonderful tuna fishing trip. I'd also like to thank Sea Isle Tackle, where I bought all of my rods and reels for tuna fishing over the past many years. And finally, I'd like to thank Trey Kistler of Kistler Rods for the bait casting rod that I use for catching Mahi-Mahi and for catching some of the squid.